Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 386, Do I Hear a Ralts? The episode begins with Ash and the gang settled in a forest clearing where they have set up a camp to have some lunch. Of course, they were still on Izabay Island, but Ash and the gang knew that they had to be getting close to Sarosi Town so that they could board the ferry there to travel to Sootopolis City for Ash's final gym battle in the Hoenn region. Max then checked the Pokénav while Brock was preparing some lunch, and May, and Ash sat on a log relaxing, and Max found out that Sarosi Town was about a day away from where they were currently. And Max stated that he thought for sure they would have been at least out of the forest by now, because he thought that they were closer to Sarosi Town than this, although May added that things always looked closer on the map than they did in real life. As for Brock, he was disappointed that it may be at least another day until they make it as well, confirming this as he tried to look at the distance in his Izabay Island guidebook he somehow had. And he continued to make some lunch, some stew to be precise, utilizing a campfire that he had created. Everyone was disappointed at the fact that they wouldn't be at Sarosi Town for a while, although Ash tried his best not to get super discouraged, and just tried to picture himself battling in his final Hoenn gym battle in Sootopolis for the Rain Badge. Yes, Ash knew that it was called the Rain Badge now, because Brock had looked it up in his guidebook. Ash literally starts on fire because he's so fired up, as he declares that he was gonna win his ultimate battle for the final badge, trying to spread how fired up he was to everyone else to cheer them up. May and Max were definitely a bit cheered up by how fired up Ash was, as they were impressed. They'd never seen someone exhibit such fucking aura before. Just then, Snorunt suddenly pops out of its Pokeball and dances around a little bit, surprising Ash, as he wasn't used to his Pokemon forcibly coming out on their own, and he was even more surprised as Snorunt then used Icy Wind on him, extinguishing the literal fire that had engulfed him, and instead freezing him and Pikachu, since Pikachu was on his shoulder, completely into icicle sculptures. Ash then made himself fall to the ground as best he could, even though he was frozen, and this managed to break all the ice, freeing him, although he was tired as hell. And Max, May, and Brock proceeded to make fun of Ash for how easily his fired-up nature got extinguished, quite literally, by ice. But just then, Max stopped making fun of Ash as he heard a voice calling for help and ran off to find its source. Max proceeds to run almost as fast as Usain Bolt on this bitch as he continues to hear the voice. As for May, Ash, and Brock, they wondered what the fuck was up with Max, thinking that something weird was going on, and they were very surprised to see him suddenly rush off, because they didn't hear jack shit. Apparently it was only Max that heard the voice. Anyways, as Max continued running, he eventually found the source of the voice, which was none other than a Ralts that was lying next to a lake, which Max had arrived at after following the voice out of the forest. Max instantly recognized the Ralts as the source of the calling, and saw that it was both very sick and injured. Max hurriedly rushes back to Brock, May, and Ash at the campsite, and shows them Ralts, explaining that he had found it, and it had been calling, and he heard it. And Brock instantly comes to the conclusion that it must have gotten sick from falling into the lake, once Max told him that it was sick to begin with. Ash and the gang then try to tend to the sick Ralts, with Brock just trying to rub it and shit, and trying to treat it how a mother would. But Max pointed out that Ralts was quite cold, so something warm could probably help it out. So Brock decides to make some soup that was hot, and pours some onto a plate, and brings the plate to Max, kneeling down to where Max had already tried to start warming Ralts up by wrapping it in a blanket and putting it on a sleeping bag. And then Max takes a spoonful of the soup and tries to feed it to Ralts. Though Ralts turns its head away, refusing at first, although Pikachu talks to it and saying a few words, and Ralts must have trusted a fellow Pokemon, so knowing that Pikachu wanted it to drink the soup, it did, and it actually enjoyed the soup, and also felt a little better to boot, although it still needed a little bit of rest. As Max laid Ralts back down onto the sleeping bag, May couldn't help but comment on how cute Ralts is, and looked Ralts up in her Pokedex to learn more about it. And Max then introduces himself to the Ralts. And Max told himself that maybe Ralts sensed that Max would have been willing to help it, so that's why it uttered a cry for help in the first place. Suddenly, Snorunt, who was still out of its Pokeball, comes over to greet Ralts, but it gets too close to it and ends up scaring it, leading Ralts to turn away in fear, as Max pulls Snorunt away from Ralts, and he and Ash both scold it for messing around with Ralts, and basically tell it to fuck off. But this just annoys Snorunt, as it gets angry at Ash and Max, and steals Ash's hat and Max's glasses. And then, Snorunt uses Icy Wind on Max's glasses and Ash's hat, and puts them back on them, leading Ash and Max to start dancing like wild idiots when the ice-cold hat and the glasses were put back on them. They couldn't take the cold. As for Snorunt, it couldn't help but laugh at this very funny situation, and how much Ash and Max were cringing. Then, Snorunt goes over to Ralts and continues to laugh, asking Ralts if it found the whole situation funny as well, and sure enough, Ralts gets up from its sleeping bag and starts laughing, leading Max and Ash to realize that Snorunt was actually just trying to cheer Ralts up with its little situation there with Max's glasses and Ash's hat, and they were relieved that Ralts ended up being happy because of Snorunt and not frightened anymore. Max's glasses and Ash's hat then unthawed, and May suggested that if Ralts was able to laugh like that, he must be feeling much better. But Brock, however, thought otherwise, explaining that even if Ralts was cheered up, it was definitely still sick and running a fever that was pretty high, so it would be best for them to get Ralts to a Pokemon Center right away, since Brock had realized that his soup obviously wouldn't do shit for a fever, and he realized that that's why Ralts was cold. Unfortunately, though, as Brock checked his guidebook, he found out that the nearest Pokemon Center was still quite a distance away, so it would be a long trip. Max was still determined to go, though, as was the rest of the gang, although Max knew that Ralts likely couldn't make the journey on its own. So, Max offers Ralts a lift on his back, and Ralts accepts, hopping on his back. After Max had bent down to make the jumping easier, and Max declared that he was going to carry Ralts all the way there. May had her doubts that Max would actually be able to carry Ralts all the way because of how fucking weak he was, but Max promised that he would do everything in his power to, and was going to take full responsibility for Ralts until they made it to the center. So he didn't want any help carrying Ralts. Meanwhile, Team Rocket was spying on Ash and the gang as usual, using their binoculars from up in a nearby tree, and immediately they took interest in the Ralts, especially Jesse, commenting on how cute Ralts was. But James then points to his Chimecho, who was out with them spying on Ash and the gang, though without binoculars, and comments that he thought his Chimecho was a lot better and a lot cooler and cuter. In fact, Ralts didn't even compare to Chimecho. As for Meowth, he didn't think Ralts was that cute, but he still wanted to catch it, since he figured that they could give it to Giovanni. As usual, Jesse and James wondered what Giovanni could use Ralts for, leading Meowth to explain his usual boss fantasy, as he imagined Ralts singing some cute songs to put Giovanni to sleep at his bedtime after a hard day. And not only that, but Ralts could sing those same songs to just at a louder volume, to wake Giovanni up in the morning more gently and kindly, to get him ready for his day. And Meowth then imagined what a hard day for Giovanni would entail, perhaps a day where he had to fight against a rival criminal organization or some shit. So he fantasized about Giovanni getting attacked by a rival criminal organization of some thugs, but then Ralts used its psychic, as well as Safeguard, to protect Giovanni from any rival criminal organization, or any intruders for that matter. And Meowth pictured Giovanni being very thankful at Ralts for this, and Giovanni being super scared without Ralts' assistance. And also, Meowth fantasized about Ralts' awesome psychic attack, and how it could throw out all of the rival organizations to Team Rocket, or just any bad guys in general. And Meowth also stated that after such a hard day, Giovanni would probably want to go to sleep again, but he was too wound up from the day's events to actually go back to sleep. Even though he tried to just relax and be happy with the fact that the rival organization was dealt with, but thankfully, Ralts could just use his hypnosis on Giovanni to make Giovanni fall asleep. Although, Meowth also added in a bit to his fantasy, where Giovanni would thank Jesse, James, and Meowth as he falls asleep, to kind of gas Team Rocket up while he was fantasizing. Meowth's fantasy then ends as Team Rocket cheer, determined to catch the Ralts at this point, being influenced by Meowth's boss fantasy and all the possible benefits they could get for catching Ralts, such as a promotion from Giovanni if he liked them so much. So Wobbuffet then popped out of its Pokeball to agree as well, and Team Rocket put their plan to catch Ralts into motion, which they came up with on the fly. Meanwhile, back with Ash and the gang, they were running while Max was carrying Ralts, of course, heading towards the nearest Pokemon Center, down a forest path. Just then, though, none other than James, in disguise, steps out in front of Ash and the gang, blocking their path, and addresses Ralts, wondering where his sweet Ralts has been all this time. Just then, a Curlia and Gardevoir, which were actually Meowth and Jesse disguised respectively, appeared in front of James, and Ash asked if James was really Ralts' trainer, leading James to dramatically introduce himself as his fake pseudonym, known as Gentleman Lord James Jameson III Esquire. And he claims that yes, Ralts was his Pokemon, and he thanks Ash and the gang for finding it. Even though Ash believed that this guy, not knowing that it was actually James, was Ralts' trainer, Brock stopped Ash from going to give Ralts to the guy because he reminded Ash and told James for the first time that Ralts was sick and it needed to get to a Pokemon Center immediately, and that's where Ash and the gang were taking it to. But James, however, countered that since Ralts was his Pokemon, quote-unquote, it was his responsibility to handle it and take it to the Pokemon Center himself, assuring Ash and the gang that he could do so, and telling them not to worry. Max had been suspicious of James, not believing that he was actually Ralts' trainer, as he saw that Ralts seemed to be afraid of James, and went to go hide away from him, hiding behind Max instead. Right as Max realized this, James was still trying to get Ash and the gang to hand over Ralts to him by explaining that since he had a Curlia and Gardevoir, even though those were actually just Meowth and Jesse, then he definitely had a Ralts and was telling the truth. But then Max revealed to James the fact that Ralts seemed to be afraid of him, and expressed how he truly didn't believe that James was Ralts' trainer. James was startled at the fact that Max was starting to figure out his true identity, and demanded Ralts back, claiming that Ralts being sick probably just affected its mind, so it didn't remember James. Meowth and Jesse, disguised as Curly and Gardevoir, decide to walk towards Ash and the gang in an attempt to try and prove to them that they were actually James's Pokemon, to try and reason with them that if they were James's Pokemon, then Ralts would be his Pokemon as well. But while Meowth was walking to Ash and the gang, he tripped a little bit, which caused him to fall forward. Although he didn't fall on the ground, he merely just stopped walking on his toes and instead flat-footed. And this was a big deal, because Curlia was only supposed to be able to walk on its toes, not its flat feet. So this even made Ash suspicious. Since he apparently knew this fact about the Curlia, it was something that Max or Brock must have told him. But anyways, Ash declared that something didn't look right about Curlia, and by extension, something was probably weird with Gardevoir as well, and tried scanning Curlia first with his Pokedex to see if maybe he got something mixed up, and maybe Curlia could walk on its feet after all. Though Meowth quickly corrects himself and stands on its toes again, realizing his mistake, but Ash's suspicions were already raised, so he continued to use the Pokedex, and sure enough, when he scanned Meowth, it didn't show Curlia, but instead Meowth. And it went on and on about how Meowth was supposed to gather coins, particularly at night, and then slept all day. Meowth, hearing the part about him sleeping all day, gets offended, yelling in annoyance, saying that it didn't sleep all day. Although, when Ash and the gang heard Meowth talking, this confirmed to Ash that the Curlia was actually Meowth, and not just any Meowth, but Team Rocket's Meowth, since it was the only one that could talk. And Meowth then realized his own mistake, as Jessie yelled at Meowth in anger, not just for giving up his identity, but also after hearing the Pokedex entry, because she heard the part about Meowth being able to gather coins, and was reminded how, back during Johto, Jessie and James tried to get Meowth to learn Payday, but he couldn't, and Jessie scolded Meowth for this once again, asking why he wouldn't use this ability to get coins for them when they were broke. Jessie then literally tries to strangle Meowth, but Meowth, Jessie, and James had all realized that Jessie and Meowth's disguises were blown anyways, so Jessie and Meowth threw off their disguises, and James did his as well, and Team Rocket did their motto, with Wobbuffet and Chimecho joining in. Jessie then sends out her Dustox to battle Ash and the gang by using a whirlwind, which kicks up some dust and knocks Ash and the gang off their feet, and James then sends out his Cacnea, and as usual, Cacnea attempts to give James a hug, but for once, James is actually able to duck and dodge Cacnea's hug as Cacnea went flying past. James then ordered that Cacnea use Pin Missile, and Cacnea fired off a strong one, though thankfully, Ash and the gang were able to dodge the Pin Missile, but they all scurried around in the process, hiding behind different trees and bushes, with Max hiding behind a tree with Ralts, promising to protect it and assuring Ralts that everything would be okay. Ash then has Pikachu use Thunderbolt, which goes rocketing through the area, no pun intended, and then finally strikes Team Rocket, electrocuting them hard. But James simply tells his Chimecho, who was already out, to use Heal Bell to heal them up, and puts them in a better mood overall. So May knew that they would need extra help to deal with Team Rocket, so she sent out her Combuskin and had it attack Team Rocket with a Fire Spin, although Dustox simply blocked the Fire Spin from hitting Team Rocket by using a Whirlwind to kind of extinguish the fire. Jessie then sends out her Seviper to do some extra damage with a Poison Tail, but Pikachu runs up to Seviper and blocks the Poison Tail with an Iron Tail. And when both attacks meet, this causes dust to be blown both ways, and both Team Rocket and Ash and the gang were blown back for a little bit. Once Team Rocket had recovered, James told his Cacnea to use Pin Missile again, and it did, but Brock sent out his Ludicolo and had to use Razor Leaf to completely destroy the Pin Missiles before they made contact with anyone. Meanwhile, Max, who was still hiding with both Ralts and Snorunt behind the tree, noticed that Ralts was actually getting weaker as he could barely hang on to him, and was getting more sick as well, as he could feel it getting colder. So Max yelled to Brock Main Max to alert them to this, leading Brock Main Max to assume that Ralts must be suffering from something worse than a cold, which Brock realizes first. Anyways, the battle was still going on, and Team Rocket were pissed off that Ash and the gang had already united and weren't giving them any attention, so they took the opportunity to take advantage of Ash and the gang being distracted by having all the Pokemon attack at once. Jessie had her Dustox use Psybeam, and her Seviper use Poison Tail, and James told his Cacnea to use Needle Arm. These attacks frightened Max because he and Ralts happened to be right in the path of them, but luckily Pikachu, Combuskin, and Ludicolo all jumped in Max's way to block the attacks, and Ash and Brock tell Max that the battle was keeping them busy, so they were going to stay and battle Team Rocket, while it would be up to Max alone to go to the Pokemon Center and take Ralts there for now, but Max and Brock promised that they would follow as soon as they could. And Ash states that Max had to take the opportunity, with Team Rocket currently not attacking, to escape immediately, although Max was hesitant to go off on his own, not believing that he could handle the task, but after some encouragement from Ash, May, and Brock, with Ash stating that Max was the one who said he wanted to be responsible for Ralts solely, and Brock and May and say that they felt like Max had the capabilities of completing the job. Max looks back at the very sick and injured Ralts and says he would take Ralts to the Pokemon Center by himself, and he runs off. Snorunt was about to follow after Max to at least give him some support, without any orders from Ash to do so. But then Snorunt noticed Ludicolo get hit from Dustox's Psybeam and land right next to him. Snorunt was then further stopped as Ash ordered it to use Icy Wind, and it quickly did, which froze Team Rocket and all of their Pokemon in a whole bunch of ice and snow, freezing basically everything, even like the trees and bushes surrounding them. Ash congratulates it, but it just ignores Ash's congratulations and runs off, leading Ash to come to the conclusion that Snorunt wanted to go after Max and Ralts to make sure they would do okay. Ash was about to follow Snorunt since Team Rocket was frozen and dealt with. Or were they? No, they were not, because Brock then got Ash's attention, alerting him that Team Rocket actually wasn't frozen, which he had seen when all the snow and ice suddenly disappeared from them, and it was revealed that as Team Rocket was laughing, they bragged about Wobbuffet using Mirror Coat, which meant that Wobbuffet used Mirror Coat to deflect the Icy Wind. Jessie suddenly stops laughing, though, and begins to panic as she runs forward, surveying the area, and comes to the conclusion that, of course, Ralts was no longer there. Meowth joins her, and notices that Max was gone as well. May proceeds to taunt Jessie and Meowth for not learning this earlier, calling Team Rocket blind as fuck, and Ash also reveals the fact that Max and Ralts were never going to come back in Team Rocket's path because they were too busy at the goddamn Pokemon Center, running there to take Ralts and get it healed up. Upon hearing this, Ash realized that he had just made a mistake impulsively, because now Team Rocket knew where Max and Ralts were heading. So Jessie, who was angry at May's insult from earlier, had Seviper use a haze to obscure Ash and the gang and their Pokemon's vision, which in turn allows Team Rocket to make their escape and go after Max and Ralts. Meanwhile, we then see Max running through the forest with Ralts still on his back. Making his way to the Pokemon Center, he hops off a ledge, takes a right, and continues to run, and he tries to reassure Ralts continuously, saying that he would get some help at the Pokemon Center, no matter what. Not far behind Max and Ralts, Snorunt hopped off the same ledge, looked around, and took a right as well, hoping to find Max and Ralts, and it soon got really close to them. Meanwhile, Team Rocket was also going after Max and Ralts, hightailing it down another trail, trying their best to catch up with him. As Max continues to run, he notices that Ralts' condition was getting worse, especially its fever. So Max lays it down in the closest patch of grass, hoping that it could rest there and regain its health, but it still wasn't healing up, so Max knew he needed another remedy, and fast, especially when he feels that Ralts was burning up. So he quickly looks around the area, trying to find some sort of remedy, and luckily for him, he finds a bundle of berries that he recognizes as ones that his mother would always give to him whenever he was sick. So he goes up to Ralts and tries to feed it these berries. Unfortunately, even if Ralts did want to eat, it was so sick and injured that it didn't even have enough strength to eat anything. Seeing how Ralts wasn't eating, Max started to worry that maybe it was giving up on itself, and thought that it was fucking dying if it wouldn't even eat. As Max examined Ralts' ever-worsening condition, he just got worse himself as he started to break down crying, dropping the berries on the ground, and he rants to himself about how all he did in the end was let Ralts down, questioning why he thought he could be a big hero and take Ralts to the center all by himself, commenting that his friends were wrong about him, he couldn't do anything well on his own. He failed to bring Ralts to a simple Pokemon Center in time. Max then envisions Ralts dying, and this just makes him cry even louder, and the only sound that was matching Max's crying was the sound of Ralts' intense panting, showing how exhausted it was. Just then, though, Max notices a icy wind blow past him, and he looks up from the ground that he was crying on to see Snorunt holding some of the berries, on which it had just used its icy wind to freeze the berries solid. Max was immensely overjoyed, because he knew what Snorunt was thinking when it did this, and thanked it for coming up with such a good idea, as he pulled out a rag from his backpack, and Snorunt dropped the berries onto the rag. Max then tied the rag together and used it to essentially form a makeshift ice pack for Ralts, and places it on Ralts' head, which makes it feel somewhat better, easing its fever, as Max thanks Snorunt again. And now that Ralts was feeling a bit better, Max grabbed a berry that Snorunt had frozen, and decided to try feeding Ralts again, trying to convince it to eat, as he gave it the berry, and this time, much to Max's delight, Ralts actually took a bite. Meanwhile, after Team Rocket had escaped, Ash, May, and Brock started heading in the direction Max went, to try and find him, since they were worried about Max, because he'd been gone for quite a while. May was especially worried if Max was okay, along with Ralts and Snorunt, although Ash and Brock realized that they should stop worrying and instead comfort May, who was probably especially worried since Max was her brother. So Ash and Brock reassured May that Max was probably already at the Pokemon Center, just taking a little break to relax. That's probably what was taking Max, Snorunt, and Ralts so long. Meanwhile, as for Max, Ralts, and Snorunt, they were now hurrying along a little cliff that was above the forest, and Max assured Ralts that they had to be getting closer to the Pokemon Center by now, when suddenly Team Rocket interrupted Max, appearing on the path, blocking Max, Snorunt, and Ralts' path, as they demanded Ralts, though Max obviously refused, which led into an argument, in which Team Rocket tried to scare Max, but Max simply said he would never let Ralts fall into their evil hands. Right as Team Rocket tried to forcibly take Ralts, they were then levitated by a psychic attack and blasted off, wondering what the fuck just happened, as they did. Max wondered what the fuck just happened, as did Snorunt, but Max suddenly realized what happened when he saw Curlia and Gardevoir materialize in front of him, after having used teleport to come from somewhere else. And Max then realizes that it was Gardevoir and Curlia's psychic attacks that blasted Team Rocket off, and Gardevoir and Curlia then teleport closer. Max was amazed to see Pokemon like Curlia and Gardevoir, knowing they were Ralts' evolved forms, when suddenly Gardevoir leans forward, gesturing that Max should give Ralts to it, leading Max to realize that since the Curlia and Gardevoir were Ralts' evolved forms, they probably wanted Ralts, and it might have been their youngling. Although, much to Gardevoir and Curlia's surprise, Max refuses to give up Ralts. Although he reasons that Ralts had fallen very ill, and he was taking it to the Pokemon Center to treat it first. Although it was pretty hard for him to explain this to Gardevoir and Curlia. And Curlia didn't even believe Max, especially when Max tried to just back away with Ralts. Curlia started to think that Max just wanted Ralts for himself, although Snorunt was ready to defend Max and Ralts. And seeing how Curlia was about to angrily fight Max for Ralts, Snorunt jumped in front of Max and Ralts and started to argue with Curlia, refusing to let it get closer, and this argument was about to escalate into a battle. Max tries to stop this battle though, encouraging Snorunt to stop fighting and trying to get Gardevoir and Curlia to believe him, but this just made Curlia even angrier, as it still refused to believe Max and fired off an angry psychic attack, and this causes an explosion of blue light. This blue light was then countered by a green light, sourced from none other than Ralts, who, despite being weak, had levitated out in front of Max to protect him, and physically blocked the psychic attack with a safeguard. But, since Ralts was so weak, this safeguard was Ralts using the last of its power, so it started to fall to the ground. Curlia gets frightened by this, and it runs to go save Ralts, but Ralts falls into Max's arms first, safely. This actually made Curlia more scared though, not trusting Max, so it runs forward towards Max to retrieve Ralts, but Gardevoir actually holds it back, indicating that it trusted Max now, realizing that if Ralts was willing to trust Max enough to save him, then Gardevoir and Curlia should trust Max as well, especially if it was going to treat Ralts. and Curlia, although hesitant, decided to oblige to what Gardevoir said and backs off, since Gardevoir was like the leader of the Ralts, Curlia, and Gardevoir, obviously. Max thanks Gardevoir and Curlia for their support as they teleport away, fully entrusting Ralts to Max for now, as Max and Snorunt head off to the Pokemon Center, with Max now carrying Ralts in his arms. And we then see Max rush as fast as possible to the center, sliding down a steep hill and continuing to run across an open plain for quite a distance, even well into the evening. Throughout the days-long trek, Max and Ralts and Snorunt go as fast as they can, as Max and Snorunt keep each other entertained. And by dark, Max made it to the Pokemon Center with Snorunt and Ralts, and instantly explained the situation to Nurse Joy, and gave Ralts to her, as Nurse Joy and her Chansey rolled Ralts on a stretcher and put it inside the intensive care unit, and Nurse Joy and Chansey hooked it up to a machine and a whole bunch of wires and started to treat it. Max and Snorunt were very anxious, worried about Ralts, so they stayed by its room, looking in the window, basically the whole time. And Max was kind of freaked out by all the medical equipment, such as the analysis machines and wires and ventilators that Ralts was hooked up to. Although he had faith that Nurse Joy and her Chansey knew what they were doing, as Chansey was writing down all of Ralts' vitals on a clipboard. Just then, Max hears someone calling his name, and he turns around to see that his sister and Ash and Brock had finally caught up to him, and hurriedly met up with him. Max had been strong for Ralts, because he didn't want to look sad, thinking that it might make Ralts weaker, but now that May, Brock, and Ash were here, Max couldn't be strong any longer, and he broke down and ran to his sister, who gives him a comforting hug as he cries in her arms, with May calmly soothing him by admitting that he really came through this time, and congratulated him on delivering Ralts to the Pokemon Center, just as he promised. Once Max had stopped crying, Ash and the gang decided to sit on a bench in the hallway, waiting to find out about Ralts' condition, deciding to not look in the window, since that was just making Max more upset, as he saw Ralts hooked up to wires. Ash and the gang waited all night, and soon, by the time morning arrived, the light that indicated the intensive care unit was in use shut off, and Nurse Joy came out of the intensive care unit to inform Ash and the gang that Ralts was now going to be fine, since it was now fully healed. Ash and the gang were all thrilled with this, especially Max and Snorunt, who both immediately rushed into the intensive care unit as soon as they were permitted, and they instantly spotted Chansey standing by Ralts, who was now up and awake on the examination bed, and Max instantly went up to it and hugged it, and was very pleased to know that Ralts was as happy to see Max as Max was to see it. Snorunt was overjoyed to see Ralts as well, as it danced around happily right by Max and Ralts. Nurse Joy then officially states that Ralts could leave at any time, but admits that Max really got to the Pokemon Center just in time, as if Max had arrived even an hour later, Ralts might not have survived, since Ralts had a severe case of pneumonia. Brock thanked Nurse Joy for all her treatment, because, obviously he had to flirt with Nurse Joy, while Ash and May congratulated Max on being able to save Ralts on his own merit, and praised him for stepping up on his own when he needed to. Although Max suddenly stopped being overjoyed and fell silent, as he had realized that since Ralts was feeling better, it was time for Max to give it back to Curlia and Gardevoir, and he took Ralts outside and explained this to it. Right as Ash, Brock, May, Nurse Joy, and Snorunt follow him, and Ash, Brock, May, and Nurse Joy questioned what Max was talking about, leading Max to put his head down in sadness, not wanting to give up Ralts, but he knew that he had to give it to Curlia and Gardevoir, as he starts to call out for Curlia and Gardevoir, telling them that it was time for them to take Ralts, since it was all healed now. Initially, there was no response whatsoever, but a few seconds after this, Curlia and Gardevoir actually appeared, although it was actually just Jessie and Meowth in their disguises again, who had come to capture Ralts. As for James, he was hidden off in some nearby bushes, convinced that Team Rocket would actually be able to steal Ralts this time, as long as Max didn't figure them out, and Meowth stayed on his goddamn toes, and he quietly whispered for Meowth to stay on his toes. But unfortunately, the second that Jessie and Meowth appeared, Max, Ash, and May already knew that something was up. Somehow Brock didn't. He was probably too focused on Nurse Joy, but Ash and May were merely suspicious, whereas Max looked angry and exclaimed that he knew for a fact that Jessie and Meowth were actually part of Team Rocket and not Gardevoir and Curlia, explaining that after he had seen the real Gardevoir and Curlia, he could see through fake ones right away. Jessie and Meowth then got frightened, as Max claimed that Jessie and Meowth were evil for pretending to be a Curlia and Gardevoir, since Curlia and Gardevoir were actually nice and would never let Ralts fall into the hands of Team Rocket, armed with Team Rocket, who were evil pricks. Jessie and Meowth tried to convince Max he was wrong, but this just made Max even more angry, as he ordered Ralts to use a psychic attack to send Meowth and Jessie blasting off, and the psychic attack does so, also knocking off Jessie and Meowth's costumes. As Jessie and Meowth blast off, they yell at James for not blasting off with them, as he usually did, and James panicked, realizing that his cover was now blown, when Max, Ash, May, Brock, and Nurse Joy spotted him in the bushes. So James tried to run away, but as he ran straight into Curlia and Gardevoir, who had shown up hearing Max's calls, and Curlia and Gardevoir immediately knew that James was dangerous, being able to sense it, and they sent James blasting off with Jessie and Meowth, as Jessie and Meowth wished, using a psychic attack. Then, Gardevoir and Curlia teleport over to Max, and Max tells them that he did as he promised, and Ralts was now fully healed, so Gardevoir and Curlia could take Ralts now, and told Ralts that it was time to go back with Curly and Gardevoir, although Max was very hesitant, struggling with his words, because he really didn't want to say goodbye to Ralts. Nonetheless, Max put his feelings aside and let go of Ralts' hand, which he was holding onto to comfort it, and told Ralts to go, although Ralts just turned back, looking at Max uncertainly, and sadly run back towards him, and hugged him, which was Ralts' way of expressing to Max that it didn't want to go with Gardevoir and Curlia, it wanted to come with him and the rest of the gang. However, as leaves blow thanks to the wind, Max gently pushes Ralts away, making Ralts shake its head, still hesitant to leave Max, but Max explains that he doesn't feel ready to be a Pokemon trainer yet, and he was too young to be an official one, so he couldn't take Ralts with him right now, but he promised that he would eventually find Ralts again, and once he was ready to be a Pokemon trainer, he would take it as his first Pokemon. As soon as he was old enough, and Max then hugged Ralts one more time before getting up onto his feet, as he was down on his knees since Ralts was so short, and Ralts accepted what Max said and made its way back to Gardevoir and Curlia. As Ash, May, Brock, and Nurse Joy look on, proud of Max for making a new friend. Gardevoir then nods at Max, and Max nods back, insinuating that Gardevoir and Max respected each other, and Gardevoir especially respected Max for being willing to return Ralts to its family. And one by one, Ralts, Gardevoir, and Curlia then take their exit, using teleport to go away, while more leaves blew in the wind. Even with Ralts gone, Max then heard Ralts using its psychic telepathic capabilities to call out to Max yet again, and Ralts confirmed that it would keep its end of the promise, and would try and find Max again once he was old enough as well, and reminded Max to make sure he keeps his promise when he was old enough, and comes back for it, and Max assures Ralts that he would keep his promise. The episode then ends with Max just staring in the direction that Gardevoir, Curlia, and Ralts had walked in before they teleported away, as he reflected on everything he learned after taking care of Ralts, and further cemented his dream to become a Pokemon trainer one day, so that he could raise Ralts. Ash, Brock, May, and Nurse Joy watched Max simply stand there in the blowing leaves, respecting Max for being able to know what was best for his Pokemon, and instead let it go back to its family. Ash and gang then say goodbye to Nurse Joy and continue on their journey to Sutopla City.